Okay, this is Valley of Tears from MMP Games. It's part of the Battalion Combat Series. We're just going to have a very quick look at some of the specific rules for this game. Just for people who've played BCS before, they want to see what sort of things are going on in this particular module. The first thing we'd look at is the SAM boundary. Now, surface to air missile boundary effectively, and these are these green dotted lines here. Now, anything that's got a green dotted line going through it is inside the SAM boundary. There's a SAM boundary on the Sinai and there's a SAM boundary on the Golan as well. Now, the real effect of the SAM boundaries, well, it's twofold. There's one, it makes close air support for the Israelis more difficult, and the second one is if you conduct operations outside that boundary for the Egyptians. I'm not sure about the Syrians, I'd have to double check that, but definitely for the Egyptians, if you operate outside that SAM boundary, you take a penalty. So that's worth thinking about. So actually what type of penalty that is. Right, that penalty is actually quite severe. It's a -1 to your action rating for all your units. So that's worth noting. You'll see these little red areas encircled here. These are defensive zones. Oddly enough, they've no idea why they didn't put them on the map. They have no effect whatsoever. They were there for Israeli operational planning. This seems a bizarre thing to put them on the map. You've got the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal has different effects, but you also got these water boundary hexes which work as normal, but the canal hexes are a bit different. You can't use enemy zones. Well, enemy zones are controlled, don't cross them. You can't attack across them, but you can assist. You can't conduct an engagement across, and you can't attack by fire across, and you can't act as a spotter across them. We've got other little terrain types that are really just specific to this module. You've got Chinese Farm, which is, I believe, oddly enough, was a Soviet aid program. Where these, you've got your little irrigation hexes here. You've got the Latif. I don't think that's the correct pronunciation, but these are lava fields that you find on this board. Another one you might have not seen. You've seen wadis on the Kasserine one. And you probably also have seen salt marshes on Kasserine, like here. Any other specific one? Discuss Mount Hermon, which is an observation post, very specific game observation post that allows you to spot for air support over the entire Golan. I've already mentioned weather, but I'll mention it again because it's more specific to this video. The weather's always fine. So you don't throw for weather, and visibility is always 4 hexes. Unless you're using that observation point where you can see the entire Golan map for close air support from it. Other interesting things. You've got a replacement table which is specific to the game, which is cunningly hidden away on the record track. I noted this was mentioned in the rules, but I had no idea where it was. I just seen it by accident, to be quite honest. Now, some a little bugbear of mine, if you mention tables anywhere in a rule book, tell the reader where the table is. Don't assume they know where the table is. Time and time again, I've seen this problem in rule sets. Some people actually address it, but it's a failure of this system as well as many more so. Buddies. The concept of buddies is buddies you don't end up creating negative snafu for units basically having crossing supply lines and things like that. Now, Israeli units, they're all buddies. Any Israeli unit is trained to fight with any other Israeli unit. Egyptian units, Arab units, they are buddies. Like tanks and mechanized units are always buddies to infantry and commandos. Apart from that, everything else works as a normal unit. Okay, so they're not buddies apart from those specific cases I mentioned for Arabs. Other interesting factors: support. Israelis never use support units. You're probably thinking, wow, that's different. And Egyptians and Syrians, they do use support units, but only ones that are specifically marked as support. You can't just put an AV unit into a support role. You're restricted on how they work. Okay, it must have support either on one side of the counter or the other. Right, supply and isolation. This is another interesting one. Israeli units are never isolated. And this is yet again because of the way the Israeli army is trained to fight. They're not totally dependent on being near HQs. So they don't suffer a penalty. And also the Israelis knew that their army, large elements of their army, would effectively always be fighting in isolation. So they're trained to handle that. Arab units suffer isolation as normal, apart from their commando units, which are special units, which are, I assume they're helicopter dropped. It just says they're inserted behind enemy lines. There's one here. There's this Palestinian commando unit that's appeared here. It doesn't specifically say how they're delivered, but I believe it's by helicopter. SNAFU, there are SNAFU roles specifically to all the nations, and they vary by turn. Engagement table cap. You can only have a +3 maximum in an engagement role. There's a reason for that. It's because of some of all these modern weapons all interacting. It would be possible to have very, very high positive modifiers in certain circumstances, and the designers decided they didn't want that. Orders I'm not using. Bridges, when bridges are in place, they automatically gain access roads. Okay, so it might not appear that there's an access road there. It just comes into existence the moment the bridge is in place. Bridges across the canal, they just appear. They have a date on them, right? Where they appear, they become present on that date. So you don't actually have to build them as such. That's all abstracted. Israeli bridging is a bit different. Israeli bridge units, 2 of them have to be towed by armour, and 1 is mobile. So sort of, I'm not quite sure, but anyway, that's that. The sequence of play has changed slightly, and mainly because of the introduction of the air phase. Now, I haven't played this game system before, but I do believe that this air thing is totally unique to how air is done in any other system. Now, I'm not going to go into the air stuff because it's very complicated and it would need a video on its own. Activations, this is an interesting one because there's two fronts. You've got to do all your activations for both sides for one front before you do the other one. You can't swap from one front to another. You basically, if you're playing opposed, you've got to agree which one you're going to do first. If you can't, you roll a dice for it. Okay. Israeli units, this game doesn't allow you to switch fronts. You're pretty much assigned. The Israeli army was basically divided into 4 specific units. You had your Golan Front, Sinai Front, Central Front, and Strategic Reserve. Your unit and games like Barlev allowed you a bit of flexibility. Well, it allowed you a lot of flexibility moving units around, but this game doesn't. It's pretty deterministic in where units appear and which area they're assigned to. The only exception is the Air Force, which can switch quite easily from one front to another as required. Now, that is total movement of the Air Force is an optional thing, but there is, well, I don't want to get into air stuff. I've already said that. Some bridges. Let's have a look. There's some other stuff here. They got static units. Right. They've got no zone of control, they can't move and stuff like that. There's a couple of special rules. There is one really special Israeli unit called Zivka, which I'm not really sure what it is. I think it's a task force of some description that operates in the Golan Heights, but it's got a lot of special rules and it's very, very flexible on how it can be used, but it only exists up to the 8th. I assume it is absorbed into the conventional army structure at that place. One thing the Israelis have got, which is quite unique to this game, is they have this thing called extreme tempo. Now, so long as you successfully get your second activation, you're also able to use an extreme activation, which is like an extra activation on top. It has quite a lot of restrictions, but it gives the Israeli units capabilities way beyond what the Arab units have. Now, the extreme tempo is only available on turns 1, 2 and 3. That's the 6th, 7th and 8th of October. That yet again reflects Israeli combat doctrine. They are trained to fight in an extreme circumstance where they haven't got the full command and control of all their HQ units in place, and the Israeli units are trained to be highly flexible and self-reliant. We discussed anti-tank guided missiles. These are a bit of well, it's totally new to this type of game. You can see these anti-tank guided missiles here. They can't conduct attacks unless they are mounted on BMPs. There are special units, which I probably can't find one off the top of my head. Might be one on the Golan Front. Nah, I can't see them, but where you've got BMP 1s, these units can actually conduct attacks because they're let's just check this. Right, they're not using ATGMs to do their attacks. They're using the 73mm turret gun on the what is effectively a transport vehicle. What the hell do you call these things? Yeah, I'm having a senior moment, but they're infantry fighting vehicles. That's it, basically. A very sort of primitive type. You've got amphibious brigade. This is a real special one, that this unit here that can actually move across these lake hexes. It's able to trace an MSR across a lake hex as well. So they're totally unique. Oh yeah, and those amphibious units are buddies to everybody, which is something I missed. There are special units for BTR 50s and 60s, which, yeah, again, they're sort of infantry. They're not really infantry fighting vehicles. They are armoured personnel carriers, so they're a bit more primitive. Effectively, they aren't armed with any major gun. Unlike a BMP or something like that, they're not really able to fight as such. They have special rules, and they certainly can't inflict any damage on a proper AV unit. And they're referred to as light AVs. We've discussed support AGTMs roughly. They've got a load of special rules as well. I can't really go into all of those, but you need to be aware of that. Strategic reserves, I've mentioned that the Arabs have got units which are unallocated strategic reserve, which are on their charts over there. They can come into the game on when a certain trigger happens, and on the Golan front, the trigger is when the Israelis cross this purple line, and on the Sinai front, it's when the Israelis cross. Is it when they cross the canal? I'm pretty sure it's when they cross the canal. We discussed Arab commandos. They've got quite a few extra rules as well. They're sort of, they don't really have they don't have a movement. But they're like a blocking unit that has a highly restricted combat ability. Anything else? There's some simplified air rules that you can use, which I'm not going to use. And yeah, there's a rule where you can have free frontal air allocation, where you can put your air units wherever you want. That means you could move all your air units to one front or another if required. I won't be using that either. I won't be using any of the optional units. So that pretty much gives you a rough idea of the various special rules that are in place for the Valley of Tears.